Welcome back. Well, it's going to be a busy year for President Ramaphosa. He's been elected ANC president and has to renew the party. At the same time, he has to dig the country out of the economic and power crisis it faces, all the while dealing with the fallout of the Phala saga and Jacob Zuma's private prosecution. So to further load his plate, South Africa has assumed the BRICS chairmanship. That is the bloc made up of South Africa, Brazil, Russia, China, as well as India. Asia Dilogues researcher Thembisa Fakude joins us now to discuss some of these matters further. Thank you so much, Thembisa, for your time this morning. Very good morning to you. Certainly, from a political arena, the President of the African National Congress has a lot to get through, but never mind that, the President of the Republic of South Africa still has responsibilities that he needs to adhere to. Certainly no child's play as we go into this new year and particularly into 2024.
Yes, he's got quite a lot to do after assuming that precedence of BRICS. So he's got 2024, basically the campaign will be starting in earnest soon after the State of the Nation address. The president will start campaigning for that, and he has the country to run over and above that. And there's this just energy transition, which I think is going to gain momentum this year, as it's a legacy project for the president of this country, and is quite enthusiastic in ensuring that he achieves the objectives. So it's going to be a very interesting year for the president in terms of him trying to navigate his local or domestic responsibility with those that he has since assumed, which is the international responsibility.
Well, speaking about some of these, perhaps let's go into state responsibilities. There is so much that closed off in 2022 that needs to still be outlined in 2023. For example, we still have what's obviously the insurgents between Russia as well as the Ukraine. That's not going away anytime soon, as well as the ripple effects as more and more countries become involved. And then on the other side of it, of course, it's a lot to deal with South Africa's energy crisis. South Africa, at this late last year, found itself in the United Kingdom, and a lot of deliberations and discussions were being held about, well, how do we move and go into this just transition of power in the country, and more than anything else, what does a mixed bag of a power generation actually look like? Certain policies of the ANC also being discussed right now. It's also around what do we need to do to fix our power crisis in the country, and of course it's been caught between a rock and a hard place, with some saying, hold on a second, why aren't we using our coal reserves as normal countries would do, instead of us trying to transition and actually using money from the West to actually allow for that to happen. So I wanted just to stay with the theme in terms of some of those responsibilities and perhaps controversies, and some situations he may have to be quite decisive on.
Yeah, I think the president is going to find himself in a much more difficult situation. Firstly, but we also need to understand that, notwithstanding, the president of this country is a former unionist and is not going to be a clumsy transition from coal to clean energy. He's going to continue having, hence the word just, in the mix. So he understands that there are jobs at stake, and those small towns in the cold belt of South Africa, particularly towns such as Middelburg, Witbank, stand to lose a lot if there's going to be a clumsy transition straight from coal into clean energy. So it's going to be a measured approach, and I think it's going to be a very careful approach, because we are in a situation where we need to save jobs and create more job opportunities. So he's going to be quite careful in doing that. But at the same time, he is a leader in this regard. The fact that he was invited by King Charles, who's also a well-known proponent of clean energy, means that President Ramaphosa is actually one of those that are trusted to take not only South Africa but Africa through this just energy transition. And I'm hoping that he's going to, go ahead and embark similar strategies within BRICS, now that we have Lula da Silva of Brazil, who's also one of the proponents of clean energy. So he's got a support there. So together with him, they might force a new agenda in terms of clean energy transition within the BRICS countries. But I think it's well entrenched within the G20 nations, and the G20 nations have undertaken to support South Africa in its move from the fossil fuel into clean energy. So I think he's got his work cut out when it comes to that. But the thing that he has to master moving forward, at least in 2023, is the balancing act, particularly on the BRICS between the G20, which has promised to include the AU as a permanent member, and President Cyril Ramaphosa has been all along the only African in that bloc. So he will have to balance the act there as the war in Ukraine, as you correctly said, continues to impact on energy sources and the prices around the world.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're speaking about the war in the Ukraine, as we've seen him meeting with his counterpart in the United States, there's almost that push to say, pick a side. Right? It's either you get on board and you condemn what's been happening with regards to Russia, and we can actually understand why South Africa's international relations policy has become more of a, hey, we belong to BRICS, you sort out your problems before you get us involved. But is it wise, for example, for South Africa and for the president to become a little bit more diplomatic in this regard? And how long can he continue with this diplomacy, so as it were, before there's some kind of coercion to actually pick, are you on the side of Russia, as you are with the BRICS countries, or are you side of the West, as we try to navigate what's happening in the Ukraine? Can he completely avoid being entangled in the middle? Because he seems as though he's a friend of the West and is a friend of the BRICS bloc.
Well, South Africa has taken a position, even though, of course, they made, they fumbled earlier on in terms of articulating that position. It's taken a position that is going to sit on the fence. In other words, it's not for or against the war, but it pushes for peaceful resolutions. And I think the department or the ministry that has been much more vocal in articulating that position has been DERCO. President Cyril Ramaphosa, on the other hand, has been much more diplomatic. And I think on the sideline, he continues to reassure some of the members from the G20 in the Western countries about his real position. And I'm of the view that he supports the Western position regarding the condemnation of Russia in Ukraine. But South Africa had already taken a position. It then becomes very difficult for him to change that stance. But the fact that is well received and is well liked by members of the G20 and European countries, it tells you that President Cyril Ramaphosa has a different position to that which has been articulated firmly by DERCO. But whether it's going to continue sitting on the fence in this regard is going to be quite difficult, particularly now that he leads BRICS, and he has to now and then rub shoulders and speak to Vladimir Putin. He might have to take a much more firmer position henceforth move in terms of where he stands on the Ukrainian war.
And then how does he balance now the forces that require him to be president of the political party or the governing party of South Africa and president of the Republic? Surely, somewhere, somehow, you are going to find yourself being tempted, or even doing so, taking decisions that benefit you politically and may not necessarily benefit you from the hat of statesman.
Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa faces a very difficult situation, particularly within the ANC, because the ANC forgets that it never had a relationship with Russia. It actually had a relationship with the USSR. And Ukraine was part of the USSR. And many of the ANC activists and those who are in exile spent time in Kyiv, in the Ukraine. So this whole talk about ANC supports Russia because Russia was there during the days of the liberation struggle of this country is actually not necessarily entirely correct, because the Ukrainians were there as well in terms of supporting. And I think there is a need for education and reminder, particularly within the ANC, just to remind the ANC that, it was the USSR that supported us, not necessarily Russia. And the Ukrainians played a very important role in their support of the struggle and hosting some of the liberation struggle heroes who were based in that country over the years.
Yeah, Thembisa, it becomes a very interesting year for the president. I think it becomes a very interesting year for the governing party. And more than anything else, it's about how do we pick up South Africa from the doldrums, economic doldrums that it finds itself in. There was a time where South Africa used to be deemed, whether bad or good image, as almost the United States of the African continent in terms of infrastructure development, progress and the like. But it seems as though we're just regressing faster and faster. And I wonder, where is that going to end? And what really is the breaking point for South Africa? Can we actually continue to go along this trajectory without something breaking anytime soon?
Well, we need to create jobs, and that's quite urgent. But it's also important to note that we've had a substantial number of investment coming into this country, particularly in 2022, and the president has made that point. We had a very impressive number of big companies coming back to South Africa and investing, including Netflix, Amazon, etc. So in that regard, we've done very well, but that has not translated into numbers when it comes to the reduction of unemployment in this country. And that, I think, is going to be the preoccupation of the president moving forward, that you need to reduce the number of unemployment. But importantly, you can't continue talking economic growth while we have this energy crisis that this country is currently facing. So that is also a very urgent kind of project that the president will have to address together with his ministers. And the ANC has been very vocal after its policy conference in December, well, yesterday they finished it, that the government has to move quite swiftly in terms of addressing the economic challenges, particularly the power outages that we're facing in this country.
We'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for your time. Thembisa Fakude, Africa, Asia Dilogues Senior Researcher and Fellow onto the story, though.